This is our second interview video for our ICQ Comets and Cousins YouTube channel. I'm Dan Green, and this month we have interviewed Dr. Zdenek Sekanina, who is a retired astronomer who is still actively doing some research on comets. Dr. Sekanina was unable to be recorded for his voice, but he kindly agreed to submit answers via email. The first question that we asked Dr. Sekanina was as follows. Please briefly describe your educational background. How and when did you first get interested in comets? And where were you born and when?
I was born in 1936 in a city about 30 miles northeast of Prague. I got a degree in physics and astronomy and a PhD in astronomy from Charles University in Prague. I don't remember when I became interested in comets, but it must have been before I was 16 because I distinctly recall observing periodic comet Comets in 1952 from our kitchen with my Summit Binar 25 by 100. These excellent double refractors were used to discover comets at the Skalnati Plazo Observatory by Pajdušakova, Merkos and others. I was interested in astronomy in general when I was 9, but my interest was first directed towards stellar astronomy. I remember I learned logarithms to be able to compute stars' dimensions and masses from formulas in an astronomy book. I also enjoyed observing results for the same qualities listed in different books and was thrilled when they didn't agree.
Based on your recent Kreutz Comet research, Karl Hergenrother suggested that if he ever got a time machine, one of the first places he'd visit would be the Southern Hemisphere in mid-November 363 AD. Can you tell us more about the appearance of not one or two, but several simultaneous bright Kreutz sun grazers visible at that time?
Oh, Carl, if you have a spare seat in your time machine, I'll join you. The story around the 6 words in the Res Gesti of Ammianus Marcellinus is one of the craziest as well as the most fascinating experiences I encountered in my research. For decades, I was frustrated that I couldn't find any evidence of a few bright historical sun grazers arriving at perihelion more or less simultaneously. This was the condition dictated by a series of fragmentation events of the progenitors taking place far from the sun, thus explaining the recurring step of about 10 degrees in the longitude of the ascending node between the populations. If the progenitor was Aristotle's comet, the simultaneous arrival of sun grazers should have occurred in the second half of the 4th century, around AD 367. As the number of detected subgroups has grown from 3 during Brian's lifetime to nearly 10 at present, so has the number of needed bright sun grazers in this hypothetical swarm. In broad daylight, comets were seen, is all that Ammianus felt compelled to record for posterity about the display in AD 363. Potentially the most spectacular comet show ever witnessed. It's well known that when it comes to the appearance of comets, the Greek and Roman historians' narratives are sloppy and sometimes downright appalling in comparison with the carefully formulated records in the Chinese annals. However, among modern researchers, Ammianus enjoys the reputation of a rather trustworthy writer. Besides, he was knowledgeable in natural sciences, and his description of the tsunami that hit Alexandria in AD 365 is believed to be remarkably accurate. Ammianus' remark on the daylight comets is listed in almost every catalogue of historic comets. However, he didn't provide the time of sighting, and there was a comet observed in China in August and September 363 whose motion was ruled out as a sun grazer. The catalogues leave the reader with an impression that Ammianus and the Chinese referred to the same object. This was the impression that I was left with after reading, for example, Gary Cronk's Cometography or Barrett's list of comets observed in the Greco-Roman world. Only David Sargent, in his book, The Greatest Comets in History, Broom Stars and Celestial Scimitars, clearly stated that Ammianus' account referred to another event in late 363. I realised that this was the kind of event I'd been looking for, and that the Chinese comet was in fact an inadvertent red herring. But that wasn't all. Although the amount of information provided by Ammianus was flimsy, it was enough to have made David immediately evoke Kreutz sungrazer fragments. The very fact that the comets were seen in broad daylight implies that they were obviously close to the sun, in the sky and in space, and their apparent brightness must have been around -10 or brighter. Later in the year, the Kreutz comets are seen from the northern hemisphere only near perihelion, because of their high southern declinations. Although neither the number of comets nor the observation dates are known, a reconstruction of events leading to the sighting provides useful constraints. Ammianus accompanied the Emperor Julian on his military command in the Sasanian Empire in the summer of 363. After the emperor's death and withdrawal of the Roman troops, Ammianus travelled with the new emperor, Jovian, via Edessa, which they reached in September, to Antioch, where they arrived most probably in mid or late October. Ammianus stayed at Antioch, his birthplace, while the emperor continued his ill-fated journey to Constantinople. While some modern historians estimated that he may have left Antioch as early as November, Ammianus mentioned "in the dead of winter." The comets were observed by Ammianus after his arrival at Antioch and probably before Jovian's departure. Mid-November is my best guess. Recalling that comet Icaeus Secchi passed perihelion on October 21 and was at its best before sunrise days later, one may conclude that if Ammianus's comets were Kreutz sungrazers, they couldn't have passed perihelion in late October or even early November. There are two circumstances that seem to require that Ammianus's remarks be taken with caution, but closer look appears to show that its veracity needn't be questioned. One potential caveat is the absence of any Chinese record of the event. One might expect a report of so-called sun comets based on the investigation by R. Strome. However, Strome points out that the Chinese reports of objects near the sun in broad daylight are overwhelmingly limited to the summer months. The other issue is that Ammianus was a proponent of paganism. He believed that comets were portents of catastrophic events, and he suggested that the daylight comets of 363 foretold the death of Jovian on his journey to Constantinople. If he did adjust the sequence of events to his liking, he would have moved the daylight comets at least 6 months back to be a portent of the death of his favourite pagan emperor Julian, who died in June, rather than the pro-Christian emperor Jovian, with whom he had much cooler relations.
In one of your papers, you stated that Comet 2011 W3 may be the first of a number of similarly bright comets that may appear in the coming decades. Do you still believe this to be true?
There are too many big fragments on the way. Due at perihelion between now and 2050 to 2060 are the Kreutz sungrazers from several centuries ago, between about 1100 and 1400 AD, depending on the orbital period. For some of the new populations that appear in the SOHO database, we have not seen their naked eye comets as yet, and they further increase the probability. In the 2007 paper, we expected a possible arrival in the following several years. While Lovejoy did arrive in 2011, it is now clear that it was not a member of a cluster. So I am not as optimistic of a new arrival soon as I was in 2007, although one really never knows for sure. There is no realistic scenario, only guesswork. The longer the interval of time, the higher the probability. What I can say nothing about is whether the massive sungrazers are going to arrive at the right time of the year to look impressive enough for Northern Hemisphere observers.
Which object was your first comet? Was it
1959K?
That would be Comet Burnham. You were using the 0.61 meter Radcliffe refractor?
24-inch.
With an 18-inch?
Which is an 18-inch finder.
What do you consider your most important contribution to cometary astronomy?
Oh, Swing's effect.
Swing's effect in Comet Halley?
Yes,
Specifically, what
yes.
was it?
Although before that we did Bennett, Aikman, Balfour, and Tatum.
Right. And you
And the
had
Greenstein effect.
The Greenstein effect?
Yeah, that's the variation of the Swings effect in different parts of the comet,
Oh,
because the comet has internal motion.